When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadabji, your podcast host, a practicing social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 52. Despite the traumatic complexities, he grabbed hold of the vision that was inside of him. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our courageous and daring guest, Justin Volpe. Justin is an international consultant, advocate, and peer specialist based out of Miami, Florida. He has presented and trained mental health facilities and other organizations on trauma-informed practices and used his life experiences to discuss workforce issues and connecting community providers to better serve individuals in need. Previously, before his role with National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors, Justin worked as a jail diversion peer liaison for the 11th Judicial Criminal Mental Health Project for 14 years. He has worked as a certified recovery peer specialist in Florida since 2008 and has local and national experience. Justin has extensive work experience in the community and has supervised and coordinated thousands of engagements with participants with serious mental health and co-occurring issues in the criminal justice system. He has assisted in training over 2,500 Miami-Dade law enforcement officers in crisis intervention team training. His passion for the work is based on bringing systems together locally and nationally while reducing stigma and advocating for the persons served. He is recently the recipient of the 2021 Fred Fraze Award from CIT International and has many other awards and achievements, including multiple articles and film, Definition of Insanity, with his experience with the jail diversion program and the upcoming Ken Burns documentary, Hiding in Plain Sight, set to air June 27th and the 28th this year in 2022 on PBS. Hey, Justin, welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Hey, Salima. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, that's awesome. It's really great to have you. I'm thrilled that you are on the show today, and I'm really grateful, undoubtedly, for your willingness to be here to tell your story. For me, it always feels encouraging when I get to meet guests who I can draw from their strength and their inspiration because it helps us inspire others. You know, it's really important that we take a stance together to help break barriers of mental stigma.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. That's why I'm glad to be on the show, and I'm glad you're doing what you're doing, sharing these podcasts and sharing people's untold stories. It's really amazing.
Thank you. Well, yeah, that's exactly what's going on here. So this podcast, it's really all about bringing forward untold stories that people go through, whether or not it's directly about a mental health struggle. Because one thing we know is that no matter the story, there is impact on one's own mental health in some way, which tends to remain tucked away. So the mission of this platform serves in a way to break the barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. And so now is the time to unlearn what we've learned. And together, my hopeful mission is for you and I to be able to take that stance to encourage people to share and tell what people typically have reservations for expressing. And so I'm bringing forward a trend, or continuing to bring forward a trend. It's called the mental beauty rethink. Justin, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear these words, the mental beauty rethink?
The mental beauty rethink. Wow. I mean, I just think of it as it says, to rethink what we consider mental beauty and what we consider acceptable in our society and what is true beauty and our truth. And I believe our truth and compassion and love is beautiful. Like you're bringing to awareness in this podcast, it should be more open and acceptable to share some of these things that we keep close to us.
Mm-hmm. I also feel like it adds an element of openness and curiosity and acceptance. I think the other element that I've shared before is this whole idea to neutralize and normalize health, both mental health and physical health, that they're both equal and both equally important, and both contribute to a person's whole overall wellness, but with a new reframe.
I like it.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I'm glad to be able to pick your brain and hear your thoughts firsthand. That's awesome.
Because mental health and physical health are very connected, right?
They are. They're not meant to be treated in silos. One piggybacks off the other and vice versa. So it is really important to be able to find a way where we're not necessarily talking about one thing being good or one thing being bad or one thing being better or one thing being worse, but just a way to equalize and neutralize it. It's easy to have conversations with people about physical health. It's easy to spark conversations, but sometimes I find that the moment you're introducing anything related to mental health, the temperature of the room changes, mood changes, and people respond differently. There's an awkward silence sometimes, or a funny stare, or no more eye contact from people. So I notice those things. And so taking all those things into consideration, like, yes, we've come a long way with addressing mental health and bringing it to the forefront in the limelight to make change. But I think we have a lot more to go. So I thought by having the mental beauty rethink be part of a process that people could sort of embrace, I thought would help us get us there a little quicker.
I love it.
That's awesome. Thank you. All right. You ready to get started for my question asking party?
I'm ready if you are.
Okay. Well, let's give it a go and see what happens. So, Justin, give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. How would it read?
I think if it was a headline, front page, and it was on even what you just said, mental beauty rethink, then I would think this title would encompass a lot. And it's everyone deserves an equal opportunity at recovery.
Mm. Everyone deserves an equal opportunity at recovery. And so, what does this title mean to you?
I'm here in the States and I'm not sure how the system is where you are. I want it to be as easy to get help for an open and no stigma for a mental health or
Mm-hmm.
substance abuse issue as it is to walk into a corner store and be able to purchase alcohol or tobacco. We have our things focused on the wrong thing. It should be just so easy and accessible that everyone should be able to get help as soon as it comes up. And this would help our society so much more, and people would have to suffer so much less to have these things in place.
Absolutely. Removing the stigma, being able to get the help, being able to reintegrate back into society, the acceptance. It's all part of the process.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm really curious, and I can't wait for you to unpack your untold story with me. Can you share with me how did it all begin for you?
Sure. I'd love to, and I really appreciate you giving me the space to do that. Well, I grew up in a small town in New Jersey. I live in Miami, Florida now. I've been in Miami the past 20 years. In this town in New Jersey, my grandfather started a religious cult outside of the Jehovah's Witnesses, which he was a part of in the 40s and 50s. His wife, my grandmother, was an immigrant from Cyprus. When she
Okay.
met him, she thought the streets of the United States were literally paved with gold, and she met a struggling businessman. They had two children, my father and my uncle. My uncle
Hmm.
was also diagnosed with schizophrenia. My grandmother was in and out of institutions. My father said that some days she would come home from the electroshock therapy and not able to be even able to keep her hands still for hours. So this trauma that was set down was brought on to me generationally. And when we talk
Hmm.
about generational healing, trauma can also be passed down through generations as
Sure.
well.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
So he started a religious cult, and then he started a school. My uncle and my grandfather had nothing more than third or fourth grade educations. It was a very secretive cult. He preached about the end of the world, the apocalypse. My brother and I were born in it. And ever since an early age, I was told that the world was going to end and we had to start preparing for Armageddon. And this is a burden that was put on me at 3, 4 years old, when as a child, all you want is connection and to be with friends and to play and to have fun.
Mhm.
But this downtrodden summary of what life was going to be, that was what was given to me.
And were you around other children? Like, did you have other peers or even being in the cult? Like, was there anyone else that you could interact with, or was it just your family?
There was other members, and there was actually a plot of land that I don't know how many acres. There was
Mhm.
multiple homes and families and a school. They had their own little secluded society going on, and there
Mhm.
was other families and other kids, but we weren't allowed to interact with anybody outside of the cult. We were told that anybody outside was evil and was basically not going to survive the apocalypse, and that only the people
Mhm.
that truly believed inside of here and followed what the prophet said, we would be
Mhm.
spared.
Wow. What was it like for you to be in that state as a young child, growing up, being told like you absolutely cannot, otherwise this will happen to you? How did that sit with you? What were some of the things that you experienced that can you recall?
Yeah, the faith and the belief I have today is much different than what was pushed on me as a child, and the sense of God or a higher power was more of a vengeance and a fire and brimstone and watching your move for sin. And I think there's a lot of guilt and a lot of religion that encompasses that. I remember a lot of anxiety, a lot of uneasiness, a lot of tension. Now, don't get me wrong, I had food on the table, I had a home.
Mhm.
I didn't
Mhm.
experience a lot of traumas that many people do in this world, food insecurity, houselessness.
Right. So you weren't neglected. Like you had clothes, you had food, you were taken care of, but in this belief system.
Right, right. It made me very on edge from a young kid and very hyper vigilant. I think those are two good words to use, and that I was always cautious and mindful because of so much tension. We left by the time I was 9 years old, and they put me in public
Mhm.
school. My parents were
Okay.
separated, and there was fights about back and forth, and we left the cult. But this tension and this belief kind of still stood with us.
Mm.
I became like a peacemaker in my home, and I think that that served me well to my job today. Is that I would always try to calm people down and de-escalate and keep people on the same page, and that's something that I don't know what age it started, but is a trait that still stays with me today.
Mhm. Okay. And so your parents made a choice to leave the society. What else changed for you? I mean, of course, it's hard to sort of completely leave behind the belief system in its entirety, but what started to happen for it to fade, or what else were you introduced to, or what else changed in your life?
I mean, going to public school, I went from a really like controlled society to kids smoking on the bus and cursing and like
Mhm.
the rest of regular public school, you know. And
Mhm.
I got decent grades. I made a few friends. I played outside. Like I said, it wasn't all bad. You know, I can look back on it and tell you the story, but when you're a kid, you kind of can't wrap it all together. What's happening, you know,
Mhm.
or what the belief system is, and how it was so different than other people's. I can tell you that as much as I integrated, that there was some things we didn't do. We did not celebrate holidays because they believed they were commercialized holidays. So there was always difficult times a year, and there was always tension. But
Mhm.
I think, you know, I did fine. People are resilient, and people have lived through much worse. Not to undermine, you know, people's traumas, because everybody's affected a different way, and that's perfectly fine.
Mhm.
You know, I work with the police now, and I tell them that two kids from the same family of abuse, can become mentally ill or addicted to substances, and the other could become a judge. You never know how people's chemistry are, how people relate to things, and that's fine. But my first friend that I met outside of the cult, it was like one of my best friends. We had like a small clique of friends. My freshman year of high school, he died in a dirt bike accident. And when I went into high school, I was 12th in my class. I had really good
Mhm.
grades. And then I just slipped
Mhm.
off after that. I started turning to drugs and alcohol at 14 years old. I had drank on
Mhm.
and off a couple times here and there, but started smoking marijuana, taking
Mhm.
pills. For people with families and kids that are listening, you know, a lot of kids, myself included, were introduced to a lot of things from the own family's medicine cabinet.
Mhm. Mhm.
That addiction escalated,
Mhm.
and it made me not focus on school so much, and it became an escape for the pain that I was feeling. And around the time that my best friend died, my grandfather died, and it made the front headline of the newspaper. And that
Mm.
was the kind of thing I had my back turned to, was this association with this part of my family, and this talk of God. And I didn't have a very
Mhm.
spiritual life. The only spirituality I thought I could reach was through the use of substances, and they escalated to cocaine and ecstasy, mushrooms,
Mhm.
LSD. Probably should have been hospitalized a few nights. I was talked to a counselor, given medication
Mhm.
at 15, 16 years old. It wasn't until they put an undercover cop in our high school that, you know, things leveled off. And so he arrested 7 of my friends, and I skated out, and I stayed clean until I graduated. And staying clean to me was just drinking on the weekends with my friends and not using illegal substances. I played basketball, I ran track and field. As I graduated, my mother left my father after 25 years. I had a brother that was in Miami, Florida. He came up to visit me on my 19th birthday. I moved out my father's house too when I was 18, living with a
Mhm.
bunch of friends, just partying and using. My brother was up with us, and he woke up the next morning and we were still up using drugs. When we woke up later, he said, "Man, I really don't like these people you're hanging out with here in Jersey. This is why I left." He goes, "You need to come with me to Miami and get clean."
Mhm.
Well, that's a joke, because Miami is a party city. You don't come here to get clean, let me tell you.
So when you left the cult and you went to public school, you were still in New Jersey. So in high school and all of that, you were still
Hmm.
in New Jersey. So you hadn't made your way to Miami just yet.
That's right. I was 19 years old when I left New
Okay.
Jersey in the wintertime,
Mhm.
which I know you would appreciate. Which will help make your decision because it's so cold, you know.
Certainly, we do get our fair share of cold weather. Absolutely.
Right. You know, I thought I had found paradise. What I found was an environment that I could be completely unmanageable in.
Hmm.
From 2003 to 2007, I must have moved about 10 different times. I must have had about 2 dozen different jobs. And it was always getting fired or using and having issues. Started out fun. Everything starts out fun until you have to do something with an addiction, and then it's not fun. The mental ease of not dealing with things and not
Mhm.
processing them. You know, I probably still had the mentality of a child, 13, 14 years old, when I started using, even though I was in my 20s now.
Right. And so Are you saying that when you went to Miami, sort of the using continued?
It escalated.
I'm curious about how else you were affected having gone through this whole process of leaving the cult, leaving New Jersey, getting into living in Miami and going through that period of living at 10, 9 or 10 different places and keeping a job and getting a new job or not being able to keep a job. So at what point did you notice something changing?
Well, I don't know if you've ever met somebody that always had a crazy story to tell you or always had a wild time, and the stories started to get worse and worse. And I don't want to call it my luck because I was a participant in what was happening. But situationally, things started to get worse and worse. And I would have to work 2 or 3 jobs to pay my bills, to be able to use the substances I wanted to use. I worked as a security guard at one job, and I watched a woman commit suicide, and who was very intoxicated and jumped off the ninth floor of the building and died.
Oh my goodness.
It was tragic.
And you saw that yourself?
hmm I had to call the
Wow.
paramedics and
Wow.
let the police up in her apartment, and there was nothing they could do, unfortunately. But that's the
Mhm. Mhm.
seriousness of this disease, and I didn't
Mhm.
realize it then. But in that life that you're living, you see a lot of things like this. You're a part of a lot of unmanageable situations, especially in a larger city too. I left that job. I started work at a very famous bar on Ocean Drive called Wet Willie's. They serve very potent, powerful frozen mixed drinks. And I was
Mhm.
21 years old, and I made a lot of money there. And that money that I made was just more money to fuel my addiction. And at 21 years old, I did not save a penny of it. And I was going out all the time, going to the clubs, drinking, using. Eventually, I got fired. And when I got fired, I was in my apartment, and you had said when you had noticed the change. And I sat there for 2 weeks without a job. I couldn't stop smoking marijuana to deal with the anxiety. And I thought to myself, I'm going to get another job for $7 or $8 an hour. I had dropped out of the community college the year before. I
Mhm.
said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I said, I can't do this the rest of my life. And I had people come over to my house and say, hey, you got to get a job. You got to do something. But I
Mhm.
look back at that as the first onset of my mental health issue of being stuck in an apartment and not knowing what my next move was.
Right. Wow. I mean, that must have been like a big moment for you of just sitting there in those thoughts and in that reflection. Did you encounter anything with law enforcement officers? Did you ever get into any trouble where you had interactions with law enforcement, or were you able to stay away from that?
Yeah,
Okay.
because I ended up incarcerated. And the story goes is that I found a job. I still was drinking and using like crazy. I was introduced to crystal meth in 2006,
Mhm.
and my life completely decompensated. It was the
Mhm.
full out exasperated symptoms of serious mental health issues, whether it was the chicken
Mhm.
or the egg, which came first because of my family disposition or because
Mhm.
of the drug use, opened it up, it was there. It's something I've
Mhm.
lived with possibly my whole life, and I'm still in recovery from. But I became very skinny.
Mhm.
Salima, I'm 6'1" and I weighed
Mhm.
130, 140 pounds soaking wet. I would
Wow.
walk the streets of Miami Beach in rags, more or less, in the same clothes. I worked in a restaurant in the same clothes day and out from the restaurant, dirty, not taking care of my hygiene, stealing food and supplies
Mhm.
from the restaurant to feed myself, paranoid about cops, delusional, thinking people were after
Mhm.
me, people were trying to kill me.
Mhm.
I thought I was going to get arrested for something because I was purchasing drugs and I would have to walk back, and I was just a wreck. I was a wreck. I was placed in a rehab. My family came down and had an intervention with me. They placed me in a rehab. I stopped using drugs as soon as I went in. It was outpatient. I kept my job. I kept my apartment. They would just say,
Mhm.
give it up, give it all up, and I wouldn't give up everything. When I was in the rehab, the symptoms came back. And that's how you can tell that somebody has a serious mental health issue, or when no
Mhm.
drugs or alcohol are present and these symptoms come back. So I became to get paranoid again. I became to get delusional. I was walking from my alley in my apartment to go buy a pack of cigarettes, and a taxi pinned me in the alley, and two undercover cops came out and they started to accuse me of purchasing drugs at a location. And they said, I saw you buying crack cocaine on 6th and Meridian. And I was about 3 blocks from there, and I was in the rehab, so I was clean. And I said, no, I didn't do that. And I was shaking like a leaf.
Right.
It was wintertime. I was dressed in shorts. I was cool, and I was skinny.
Mhm. Mhm.
He like writes up a summons or something. And I don't know what's happened, but they're outside of my apartment. So I go into my apartment. I'm a wreck, you know. I think they're gonna
Mhm.
come busting down my door and arrest me. You know, I grew up watching the
Mhm.
cops show here in the States in the 80s, and that's what they did, you know, police,
Mhm.
boom, and they pound down the door.
Mhm. Mhm.
I said, if they're gonna arrest me for something I didn't do, I'm gonna get a knife and I'm gonna cut myself and I'm gonna say that they cut me. So I sharpened the knife while they were still outside and I held it by my face by the door and I rocked back and forth because in my mind, in my paranoid state, that as soon as they broke
Mhm.
down that door, I was gonna cut myself. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
I mean, it doesn't make sense to the outside world, like,
Yeah.
if they don't have the full context, but I get where you were coming from, so it made sense to me from what you're sharing right now, in hindsight, telling that part of the story.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so they never came. If those cops would have had a de-escalation training, now in their defense,
Mhm.
they saw me probably walking around at 2 in the morning, maybe talking to
Mhm.
myself, moving my arms erratically, and they just said, "This guy's got to be on."
Right, so, I mean, some of the ways you presented was suspicious, but that's not helpful to make those judgments because it could be for other reasons, which is exactly what you were going through.
Or I could have hurt myself, right?
Sure.
I could have went through with it. And then to follow up with a good interaction, is when I was also in the rehab. I couldn't sleep and I'd be up day in and day out. And, you know, I grew up playing basketball in New Jersey. I played basketball all these years here in Miami. I was playing basketball at 5 or 6 in the morning, and one of the cops I used to work with outside the bar, he came in, he started playing basketball with me. And he just really, you know, reached out to me and he said, what are you doing with your life? He goes, you look like a skeleton. He said, you look like you're about to die. We
Mm.
played basketball and we talked, and you know, I didn't get the message then, but he had planted a seed
Mhm.
in me, and it's something that happened so long ago that I still remember
Mhm.
to this day.
Mhm. Mhm.
You don't know the impact you're going to have on somebody's life
Mhm.
from small words of kindness, a small effort. You may
Right.
not heal them, you may not cure them, but you did your part.
Mhm.
And that's what community healing looks like to me.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I got hospitalized after that. As I told you, I was in the rehab. I got symptomatic. I was given medication for the first time in my life. And I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. And I didn't know why they weren't letting me go. But I know that before I left, they told me, you have a mental illness. You can never use drugs again. And you have to take medication for the rest of your life. And I was 22 years old. And I said, what? Are you crazy?
Mhm. Mhm.
I took the medication. I still hadn't used drugs because I was in the rehab. And honestly, I felt okay. I got my job back. Life was just boring.
Mhm.
On my 23rd birthday, which is I was clean for like 4 or 5 months, I figured could get high again and stop taking the medication. And that's a common sign that happens when people feel better. What happens when you're given a week supply of antibiotics and you feel better after 3 or 4 days? You stop taking them and you could get sick again. So that's
Right.
what happened to me. I stopped taking my medication. I started to use marijuana, and it led to me to be in a state of psychosis again, led me to harder drugs, and eventually in 2007, I was incarcerated in Miami-Dade
Mhm.
County Jail.
And so what happened?
Well, you know, I don't like to talk about the arrest so much.
Okay. Okay.
I could tell you that I told the people, the cops, the people at the jail that I had needed to take medication and I wanted to go to the hospital. Instead, they put me on what was known as the forgotten floor, which is now a closed floor of the Miami-Dade County Jail, the psychiatric ward. People
Mhm.
have died up there, and it was used to be terrible abuse. And there was a class action lawsuit from the Department of
Mhm.
Justice to close it down. I got up there. I had a hard time believing I was still in this country. People were screaming around the clock. People were getting
Mhm.
beat down by correction officer. There was fights all
Mhm.
the time. There
Mhm.
was people having sex in the shower. It was a very, very unstable environment. I was with a cellmate that was in there
Mhm.
for attempted murder, and that was
Mhm.
nowhere near the length of my charge. And he had
Mhm.
stabbed his wife with a pair of scissors.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're handing me fistfuls of medications. I'm signing
Mhm.
consents. Medications can only do so much. It's your environment that gets people better. And
Right.
right, people that are experiencing severe psychosis and mental illness do not need to be in custody if they're not violent offenders.
Right.
So, you know, I stopped sleeping. I stopped taking care of myself. I didn't shower. I was a shell of the person I am today. At
Mhm.
23 years old, I had completely fallen off.
Right. How long were you incarcerated for?
Only 6 weeks. Only 6 weeks. And,
Well, you can't say only. That must have felt like a lifetime, though,
it did then.
right?
It did then. I was counting the
Mhm.
days, completely delusional. Maybe I watched
Mhm.
too many crime shows when I was a kid. I thought somebody might
Mhm.
sneak me out in a laundry cart or something, but
Right.
that never happened. When I stopped taking care of myself in there, they
Mhm.
start checking on you every 15 minutes, and they come around and they tap on the glass every 15 minutes, 4 times an hour, 96 times a day. A correction officer is
Wow.
checking on you because you pose a
Wow.
threat to yourself. So even though if I wanted to sleep, now I couldn't sleep. And it was
Mhm.
like I was being tortured. And they used to put the worst correctional officers up there that were problematic to deal with
Mm.
the crazies.
Mhm.
You're doing bad, so go deal with the mental health patients, not somebody that was
Right.
well trained.
Mm.
Nobody really liked being woken up around the clock. And somebody, the cell adjacent to me, told the correction officer in nicer terms, leave me alone. And this correction officer took this man out of the cell at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and just beat the living life out of him. And he just hit him so hard
Wow.
so many times. And I heard to this day, I can hear this man crying, please God, no, please God, I'm sorry, please stop. And I just heard his flesh hitting the concrete.
That must have been so terrifying.
Oh my God, I was scared to death. And then I just
Right.
heard silence. Whether he died or was knocked unconscious to this day, I will never know. But they drug him
Wow.
off. What I didn't know is this entire time, all within 6 weeks, my family was in contact with a program called the Jail Diversion Program, a program
Okay.
that diverts people with serious mental health and co occurring issues out of incarceration and gets them outpatient treatment in the community. I
Mhm.
agreed. I was transferred to a local hospital. I went to court. I went to live in a recovery house in the community and go to outpatient
Mhm.
treatment. When I got to outpatient treatment, I wasn't done. I had one last paycheck from the restaurant before I got arrested. I just used it. I used it. I met a woman in the program, mother of 6 kids, lived in a Section 8 house in Miami, and we went through the paycheck. And she left one day, left me there, and I was in that same condition. I was skinny again. I was in those same dirty clothes. I was off my medication, and I was about 12 miles away from the recovery house. Well, one of her
Mhm.
boyfriends came walking in looking for her. We got into it, and I walked those 12 miles back. And as I'm walking
Mm.
back, I'm going by. This is late July, early August 2007, and it's like
Mhm.
I'm marching in a pair of basketball shorts and flip flops, and it's hot. I mean, it's 90
Mhm.
degrees right now, and we're about
Mhm.
there. It's like 90 and humidity. And I got people going to work, and they're holding their nose, they're calling me names. Got cops going by me real slow, and that's the only time I prayed, where it's like a foxhole prayer, like, please just leave me alone. Please just keep going. Please, God. And I don't know how, but I made it home. I walked those 12 miles home. It took me a few
Mhm.
hours, and I crashed on the bed, and the phone's ringing. And it's somebody from the program saying, where have you been? Why aren't you at the program? I said, I'm not feeling good today. He says, you need to get to the program. And that was the last time I used drugs. I went back to treatment. I started to take my medication, and I started to feel better. I continued to drink. I continued to use alcohol, but
Mhm.
that was somewhat of a rock bottom moment for me. I successfully completed the outpatient treatment. The court closed out my court case a day before my 24th birthday, and I'm hard headed. I don't learn
Mhm.
very easily. And I was ready to go again. And before I left that courthouse where the jail to virgin program is, the boss came and sat me down and said, "Why don't you come talk to me before you leave?" And she said, "How would you like to be a peer specialist? How would you like to work for Miami-Dade County?" I said, "I'm paranoid. I'm delusional. You want me to be a county employee?" She goes,
Mhm.
you'll fit right in.
That's so funny.
Right? So I went from having an open
Mhm.
felony to becoming a county employee 8 months later.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
was doing
Mhm.
the job that was just done for me. The service that was just given for me. Now I'm engaging people, hundreds of people a year in the
Mhm.
community that were released from jail. And I was
Mhm.
providing support and taking them to appointments and taking them to meetings and taking them to court, bringing them food, um, helping provide all these linkages in the community. And let me tell you something: my career did not happen overnight. It was a lot. It was a lot to
Mhm.
handle while I was still
Mhm.
going through my stuff, when I was still healing, and I was
Sure.
still
I
struggling
get
with
that.
alcohol.
Right.
So I met what would be my wife 6 months later after the job. We've been together 14 years now. Things started to happen. Things started to, get better. I got a nice little apartment. I met a
Mhm.
girl. I was still taking a couple buses to work every day, and I was still dealing with my demons. But I stayed compliant with medication, and I didn't use
Mhm.
drugs. And that was really like put into my psyche. Like those are the two things I had to do. I cannot use
Right.
drugs anymore, and I have to
Mhm.
take this medication. And I believe that.
So, as a therapist, I'm sitting here and hearing your story and the journey and all of the different trials and tribulations and obstacles along the way. I think about when people come to see me for therapy, people are typically in one of three places when they start out. Some people are getting started, trying to figure out where they need to start, what they need to start with. Some people are in the middle where they're maybe facing an acute stressor or just in the thick of things and really need some help navigating. And some people are looking back. They're working on gaining closure or they're looking to make sense of things so that they can move on to the next chapter of their life. What part of the journey would you say that you're in? Would you say that you're getting started, in the middle, or looking back?
I guess I'm looking back. In the sense of looking back, it's something I still deal with every day, and I have
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
manage. It's just like managing
Hmm.
diabetes or something else,
Hmm.
another kind of
Hmm.
medical issue. You're talking about mental and
Hmm.
physical health being the same. And I have a very successful career that was
Hmm.
based on service to the community and healing. I dealt with the
Hmm.
trauma. I went to a trauma resolution center. I got
Hmm.
specialized therapy. I still see a therapist today. I've been in therapy
Hmm.
for 14 years, and that
Hmm.
helps me reflect and look back on these things and then deal with what comes up and what's triggered
Yeah.
because of my past. It's been quite a journey, and it's because of people like you, because of therapists. It's great you mentioned that, because there was a therapist when I was in outpatient treatment that, even though I knew about meditation, she would make us meditate and she would make us chant.
Hmm.
It would help so much with the anxiety, with the addictive behaviors.
Hmm. And I'm curious if you can share a little bit, if you're comfortable. When you were incarcerated, you vividly describe what it was like to be on that floor. How did that affect your mental health? What emotions or thoughts were running through your mind? What was happening for you in those moments? Those 6 weeks?
Yeah, well, it changed. Every day wasn't the same. I can't give you a complete play by play because it's been so long. But what I can tell
Mhm.
you is that I was in a state of fight, flight, or freeze. There was a lot of fighting, in the sense that I was on guard all the time. I was, like I told you, as a child, hyper vigilant.
Mhm. So your nervous system was all over the place where you were just having a lot of different reactions.
Oh yeah, and completely delusional as well. I mean, even though I was on medication, because the environment was so bad, I was so triggered. and raw, just raw,
Mhm.
toxic
Mhm.
energy. There was no time. You know, when you're anxious or you're inflamed all the time, you think of inflammation, when your body doesn't
Mhm.
get the rest. You know, I was completely unrested and had no time to take a breath and to feel safe for 6 weeks.
Mhm. Mhm. And what was it like to, like, hear the abuse that you were hearing people enduring but not see? What did that feel like for you?
You know, it's really crazy you asked that because there was a lot of times that I was so delusional that I started to think
Mhm.
to myself, is this really happening? I
Mm.
started to question my sanity because
Yeah.
I had been battling that line for some time, and to hear it, you kind of wanted it to be a delusion. You kind of wanted it to
Yeah.
be not happening.
Well, yeah, you don't wanna accept the reality that this is what could actually be happening.
No, no. We see this nationally that a lot of people are arrested for misdemeanors and can die in incarceration over stealing a bag of chips or a backpack or something, you know, so
Yeah.
minor that you end up getting a death sentence. Not necessarily from a correction officer either, but just the
Mhm.
whole disruption and trauma of jail is not the place for people to get help. Can you imagine if we were locking people up in the millions with cancer in this country?
Right.
You know?
Exactly. Exactly. No, your point is well taken. Mhm. So tell me, Justin, what's your key message to the listeners of our show? What do you want them to know?
People with serious mental health issues and co-occurring are all up in our regular society. There's people that will not share their story, that you have no idea what they've been through, and to treat everybody equally and to expect they have trauma. We all have some sort of trauma, right? But
Mhm.
when we think about a trauma informed care approach, we think about putting on gloves. What do the paramedics do before they respond
Mhm.
to somebody for their own safety? They put on gloves because
Mhm.
they just assume there might be something that they can catch. And we have to assume that people have experienced things
Mhm.
that we may not know when we meet them eye to eye. And to treat
Mhm.
people with utmost respect and dignity and to have compassion and forgiveness and understanding when we meet people because we've all been through different things and we all handle them
Mhm.
differently.
Yeah, and I hear a lot of hopefulness in your messages, right? Like, and I think it's so important to draw from what you said, just really treating people equally. Like, you don't know what the other person is going through. And if you take time to learn how to approach a situation or how to approach a sensitive matter, it can make a difference in how it's received on the other end for that person who's going through something.
Right. And have a better outcome for both of you. And that goes to
Mhm.
everything. That goes from,
Mhm.
doing de escalation work with the police to, cutting somebody off in traffic and understanding they might be having a bad day.
Yeah, bad day, or maybe they heard some really terrifying news and they're trying to get to their family member or something, right? Like, you just never know what a person could be going through.
You know, you're absolutely right. So we just have to assume that and not take things so personal. One of my
Mm.
favorite acronyms is a Q-tip. Do you know what a Q-tip is?
Yes?
Yes. Well, there's an acronym for a Q-tip, and it's quit taking it personal.
I like that.
Yeah. So say take a Q-tip. You could tell somebody that. But
I'm
yeah.
gonna start saying that to people, see what happens when I say it to my family. Oh,
Right.
goodness.
See how the
I
reaction is. I do want to share that I live a great life today. And despite
Mhm.
everything I've been through, I've done a
Mm.
lot of work in the Miami-Dade community. I've
Mhm.
traveled nationally in the States and consulted on Zoom with other territories in the Pacific. I'm now an employee for this organization that provides support for communities in the States receiving mental health dollars and using that experience, the experience I went through, the experiences that I served the community. That means that there is a voice. You have a voice. If you have gone through something traumatic, if you have had a mental health, a co occurring issue, if you have something, you have no idea what an impact you can have on this world, and your voice matters. Your voice
Mhm.
matters. You may not think it
Yeah,
does, but it does.
absolutely. Absolutely. So, Justin, I'm curious about what was that game-changing inspiration for you that would be close to you that could reflect your untold story? Like, is there a quote that comes to mind, or a mantra, or a person, a book, an event, anything particular that was really like eye-opening or like helped you pivot?
I like this one quote by Napoleon Hill from the book 1937, Think and Grow Rich. And it's whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve.
Mm,
If you think things are bad all the time and fill your mind with negativity, and
mm,
it can be a
mm-hmm.
bad place, and it can be. I think
Yeah,
we've all been there. We all
yeah,
have for moments. I might have one
sure.
later today, you know?
Yeah. You never know. You never
Right.
know.
But when you focus your mindset and do healthy exercises for your mind, and feed it good food and take care of your body and try to live healthy and clean, and your thoughts
Mm,
clean and healthy, it makes a big difference. And I
mm-hmm.
believe that if you set a goal and you can achieve it and you can achieve greatness. And I say that quote because one of the things, out of the religious background that I was born in, is there was a hope of living a better life and living a better world. And
Mm-hmm.
quote somebody else, I believe it was Gandhi. It said, be the change you want to see in the world. And that's all I
Mm-hmm.
can do.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I can
Yeah.
control. I can't control everything. I can't
Mm-hmm.
control everybody in this world.
It starts with one, right? It starts with you. It starts with yourself. So if you start somewhere, you can lead by example.
Hmm. Absolutely. And you can live a good life, and you deserve to live a good life. And that's another thing, because they've made mistakes or had issues, that they shouldn't have a good life. But,
Mm-hmm.
everybody
Mm-hmm.
deserves a good life. Everybody deserves a chance at recovery.
Right. Absolutely. So, Justin, what would be the cause or organization that you want to give a shout out to that's been really impactful for you?
I guess it's going to have to be the jail diversion program, because, they helped save my life. They gave me a career.
Mm-hmm. I mean, absolutely. It sounds like it was really pivotal for you and it really helped to get you to where you are now. So, absolutely. Shout out to the jail diversion program in Miami. Absolutely.
That's right.
So, if people want to connect with you, where are you available? What platforms are you available on?
I'm on LinkedIn,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're going to share my email if anybody wants to reach out.
Yeah, we've grabbed those from you, I think. So we'll have that on the show notes page. So people will be able to connect with you with whichever way that they would like to.
Yeah.
So, guess what, Justin?
What? Tell me something.
You just dared yourself to share. Congrats.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, Justin, witnessing your story today has been really huge. Just hearing all parts of what you were able to share and the detail of what you've been experiencing, what you went through was just massive. Witnessing the part of your story where you were telling the details about your upbringing in the religious cult, to the journey and experiences with the substance use cycles and that one last round, and the ebbs and flows of the recovery process that you went through, and openly sharing about the impact that it has all had on your mental health, and going from an open felony to becoming a county employee, and all your contributions to community healing. This is such an incredible journey and story, and really inspiring. I am sure that it's going to be so very much appreciated by the listeners of the show. So thank you for that deep conversation and for all the daring and sharing that you've done today.
I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share, Salima, and having me on the show. It's been really great. So thank you so much, and keep doing your thing. Keep daring people to
Thank
share.
you. Thank you. That's it. That's it. So, once again, Justin, thank you for being part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.